Welcome to the Pedophile Huntress. We are here to discuss and normalize the hard discussions around the crimes of childhood sexual abuse. Society avoids what we will face head on here in these discussions. We're each here tonight with a common goal that you would be encouraged in heart and united in love. We welcome you all. Tonight's discussion is about triggers. Triggers are very personal and they're different to everyone. A person's triggers are activated through one or more of the five senses: sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Sensory memory can be extremely powerful, and a sensory experience associated with a traumatic event can cause an immediate emotional reaction that bypasses the reasoning part of our brain. What happens when you are the trigger? Incest is often your mother or your father. Tonight with me, I have returning guests on the panel, Emily and Sylvia. We're going to explore those triggers and talk to you about what those feel like in real time. So tonight I want to start with the sense of sight. Often someone who resembles the abuser or who has similar traits or objects like your clothing, your hair, a distinctive walk, the way you sound. What happens when that's you? So let's start right there, ladies, and talk about, I've had so many people, even in my own family, who say, what do you do when the trigger's you, right? Like I'll put lipstick on and I pull my purse up and I pull my little mirror out and I see my mom. And my mother was a sexual abuser to me, and immediately I'm off put, and I want to put I want to reject myself. That's the
Mhm.
easiest way to say it.
Mm.
And so, what does that look like for you guys? It's really hard when it's a trigger that I love that when I read that often it's someone who resembles you that will trigger you. Well, what if it's us? And oftentimes we do look like our parents. So, talk
Mhm.
to me about that a little bit.
Yeah, most definitely. I I was recently yesterday triggered just by a show um that was on TV, and the man just reminded me so much of my father. I had to immediately last night I had to immediately just change the channel.
Mhm.
Um and I had to go and do a little prayer because you know triggers are things that maybe too we haven't healed from yet, which
Mhm.
I mean, this is a constant journey of healing we have, right?
Right.
We'll always have that wound, that trauma wound. So but it's just sometimes crazy because it's even sometimes when I'm doing my eyebrows, which is so random and so detailed, but I feel like I have my father's eyebrows. And so
Mhm.
sometimes when I'm doing them, I focus and then I have to step away. But
Mhm.
like you said, they come in so many different forms. And we
Right.
just have to be sure and give ourselves grace
Mhm.
and just step aside and speak to our hearts. And, just be really honest, maybe even be able to call a friend instead of just trying to not react and not have the
Right.
emotion, that we're having. Of course, if we're, and again, social occasions, just certain but I would just encourage everybody to pay attention to those triggers because that means we've got a wound, So if we get triggered, there's something that we're feeling at that time. And it's just so
Right.
important to be honest about that and not just shove it, and just try and keep it moving
Mhm.
without acknowledging it.
Exactly. And we're going to talk about some things that we can do. And I love that you bring that up. And
Oh,
I
great.
do
Mhm.
think that what you're talking about, the raw discussion of what it's like. I was sharing with Emily before you came on about my hip diagnosis today, and just having somebody understand that. What I really want to do today is just have that person listening understand that we get what it feels like when you yourself are the trigger. It's very odd. And we're going to talk a
Yes.
little bit later about how our children trigger us. Because again, these are such
Mhm.
intimate things that it's so distressing. So Emily's the one actually who brought this topic up. So Emily, I want to hear from you about that.
Yeah, so, it's interesting because For me in my healing journey, I was compartmentalizing and trying to continue in relationship with my family for a long time because
Mhm.
I really wanted it to work. I was really hopeful that there would be a change of heart if I reached out and explained myself over and over and, all those things, trying to
Mhm.
reconcile. But then once I really started to recognize what had happened to me and what the reality of the situation was, and I started to actually integrate the truth,
Mhm.
that's when I started to notice myself
Hmm.
being
That
similar
is
in
such a great way to
appearance
say it. Yep.
to my parents. And I realized that it was hard to integrate myself with myself. If that, I don't know
Yep.
if that makes any sense, but
No, it's another way to
Hmm.
say
I,
self-rejection.
yeah. And it was not even rejection so much as fear.
Mhm.
So I lived in a lot of fear, like we talked about the last time I
Mhm.
was on with my parents, and also some just kind of ongoing sense of betrayal, because my parents were very proper in a lot of ways, and my mom played piano beautifully, and I remember seeing her hands playing piano, but also remember seeing her hands playing piano and thinking, how could she play piano so beautifully but also physically abuse me so harshly? Like, how does that
Mhm.
work together? And I remember that as a child, and when I see my hands in certain positions, I flash straight back to those moments of watching her play piano
Mhm.
and remembering as a child feeling so confused and so angry.
Hmm.
And then also with my hands, it's been my main difficulty. Um, my hands are quite a mix of my parents' hands. And my dad was the one who was of my parents who sexually assaulted me. And that brings fear when I see my hand looking like
Mhm.
my father's hand. It's very deep, like a primal fear, like a protect
Mhm.
yourself
Yes.
Yeah,
flash.
I get it.
And so I've had to do a lot of work. And Sylvia, I really appreciate what you said about reaching out and talking about it.
Mhm.
So, of course, I talked with my therapist about it extensively, and she just listened and let me explore it and talk her through what I was experiencing. But I
Hmm.
also just started calling safe friends and talking with them
Oh, it's
about it.
awesome.
Yes.
And I'm so grateful I had safe friends who took me really seriously and were so kind and supportive of me. um, but I've done some things to try to alter the appearance of my hands sometimes to distract my brain. And
Mm.
so I've painted my fingernails and then just like had a commitment to always have my fingernails painted because that helped my brain
Yes.
I
not equate my
Not
hand
recognize.
with my
right.
dad's hand. Um, and it's interesting because I thought about wearing a ring on my right hand. I've never actually done it, but I've thought about these things like, okay, what could I do to
Mhm.
confuse my brain a little bit? But when I'm going through a hard time with it, I give myself grace and say, okay, this is a week where I need to paint my fingernails. I just need to paint them because my mom never had her fingernails
Right.
painted, and my dad did not either. And then the other thing that I did, there's a few things, but another thing I did was I got a tattoo on the inside of my right wrist
Oh,
that is
love it.
a survivor's unity fire rose. And I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but it is something that Lady Gaga has, and she's a sexual assault survivor. And it's something that was designed by an art student at Stanford who was also a survivor.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I got that to remind myself, no, you are choosing to grow as a pure white rose out of this horrible ordeal you've
Hmm.
lived through, and you're
Right.
not alone in it. You're not alone. And so that was really powerful when I was finally ready to do that. And then that's with me every day. And that's been a really neat thing for me to do. The other thing
That-
is that with being a mother, my husband and I, when my daughter was a baby, we committed ourselves to not use physical discipline with her. Like, we made that commitment together. And I prayed over my hands because I just wanted them to be gentle. And I was
Mhm.
somewhat afraid that I would repeat what my parents had done
Mm-hmm.
because, we have their genes in us. And I was
Right.
afraid of what my hands might do.
Well, and the
And
environment, right? It's what we
yeah,
were, you're learning from them.
yeah. And so I've spent a lot of time praying with my hands open and talking to God about them and looking at my hands and
Mhm.
processing all this with my hands. And I wrote a poem. Like, I've just done all this work because it was something I wanted to have peace with. And
Right.
one thing I did this year is I started to play the piano again. And I hadn't played since I was 10 years old, partly because of everything in my family. And that's been cleansing for me too, because I can watch my hands play and live in that confidence that so far I have been carried through mothering and I've maintained a gentleness with my hands. And so it's almost like
Yeah,
rebuilding myself in a way.
exactly. And that's kind of um the theme I think that we need to get to is that we are separate from them. And it's a very
Mm-hmm.
hard thing because every time almost every panel or every interview that I've done, there is this theme that we're somewhere complicit or very close to the abuser. And so I think what
Mm-hmm.
happens when we see those overlays is, see, and you talked about fear, and I did have great, great fear with my father. With my mother, I hate to say this, but I had a repulsion because it was just so
Mm-hmm.
repulsive to me on many levels, taste and just all of it. And so I feel repulsed. So for me, isn't that funny that I say self-rejection because I'm repulsed by it and I want to go away from it. It's like Sylvia, you said, when I look in the
Mm-hmm.
mirror and I see that, I just want to go away from it. But I think what helps is that separation. And what I heard you say is I'm doing all these things to show myself that I'm separate. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think that it is this melding of our souls somewhere with them. They talk about soul ties and these kinds of things. It's weird how abusers keep us in their back pocket, and it's hard to get out of that back pocket, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like our
Yes.
love for them, or like you said, I'll do anything to stay close to these people. And it's not until you step out of denial that these things
Mm-hmm.
that we're talking about happen, because you said, which I've heard another man explain to me, that the closer he steps into the truth, the more he looks like his dad all the time, and it triggers him. He doesn't use the word trigger, but it's also, I'm separate from them, right? And so I love those distinctions that you've made in your physical body that say I'm not. And it's funny, I have my mother's hands, and I always keep them done or nails on because it doesn't look like her. But when I have
Mm-hmm.
nothing on, it's like her hands, and her hands were very cruel to me. And so
Mm-hmm.
it is very weird when you are the trigger. Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I had a friend that couldn't take a bath because she was allergic to herself. And it's kind of the same thing a little bit, right? Like we have it's
Mm-hmm.
terrible. And so I love that I mean, a lot of these things are not written about or talked about because I think only a survivor understands what that feels like when you're the
Mm-hmm.
trigger, right? And so, Sylvia,
100%.
yeah, what are some
100%.
other things that you think you've done to make yourself separate? And isn't that funny? Just even eyebrows, you guys, because
Mm-hmm.
we had to
Yes.
look
Mm-hmm.
at them there our whole life. We were looking at them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
to live
And
in
in some really awful situations.
some very awful situations, that's exactly right. And so we
Mm-hmm.
don't. It is stepping into truth. Again, the cost is that you're always in that truth, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so even looking at ourselves. But Sylvia, what are some
Yes.
other tools that you've tried to do? I like that you say, I often talk to God about it. That's one of my places I go to immediately. When I wake up,
Yes.
sometimes, I used to wake up with really bad dreams. Most of those are gone now, but around the murder, I had
Me
really
too.
significant. Yeah, isn't that cool? And so I always say
Yeah.
that modalities are good, but they cannot heal a broken heart. Only God can.
Yes. Amen. And I did used to have a lot of nightmares. And of course, that's very triggering because
Oh,
you
it's
know, you're
terrible.
actually reliving what actually
Yes.
happened to you. And I think, how in the world is my brain wanting to even take me back to that? You know,
Right. Because it's
what
not
is
done
going
yet.
Mhm.
right?
It's not
But
done
I
yet.
learned to just pray before bedtime and ask God to guard my mind
Mhm.
and not allow the enemy, because you know he comes to us and we're very vulnerable when we're sleeping. So I learned how to pray that hedge of protection over my bed and my thoughts and my
Yeah, I do
dreams.
that. I do that as well.
Um, and and then I think just working, like, you know, Emily saying, just doing the work.
Mhm.
And you armor up, you know, with God, and no, devil, I'm not gonna.
Mhm.
um I showering was triggering for me for a
Showering.
long for a long
See, and
Mhm.
time.
isn't that terrible? It should be this
Mhm.
comforting thing of getting clean.
Yes,
These are the
Mhm.
yes,
things that are so awful that are taken from us. I mean, what was taken are things that we can't really explain until we talk this way. So keep
yeah.
going.
And I mean, you have to take a shower, you know, you can't just. So I just made it something really special between like a
Mm,
prayer time, and I would put on some Christian music, or sometimes if it was just some kind of beautiful music that I wanted to listen to, and
that's
I'd light
cool.
candles and I would just dim the lights, and make it my sanctuary, and to let my memories know that you're not welcome here. This is my
You're
time.
changing it,
And
Mhm.
yes,
changing the
and
story.
we have to, you know, we have to do that. We
We
have to
Mhm.
make
do.
those changes. And I know there's a lot of people, because I've spoken with a lot of women, that they're very bathtubs, bath time,
Mhm.
showering is very triggering. And,
Mhm.
you know, and I got it because it was for me too. And now it almost never happens, but it does happen from time to time.
Mhm. Well, and that's kind of a distinction I want to make too, is that it's not always the enemy in triggers. Sometimes it's God saying, I need to
Hmm.
heal this area and let's get this
Yes.
out. I
Yes.
remember going down I lived in Oregon for years and years and years, in Washington, Oregon, and we'd go to the coast often. And one night I went down there, we were in this beautiful house. My daughter was there, we're having a lovely time. I smoked then, so I went out on the porch to have a cigarette, and the murdered lady came walking out of the woods. That's what it felt like to me.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
I flipped out and ran in the house because it was an absolute flashback. That wasn't a trigger, that was a
Hmm.
flashback. And so anyway, I went to my counselor, and one of the things that a good counselor could do, and anybody listening that has not been in counseling, get in counseling, a good one
Mhm.
that's actually trained in this kind of trauma, childhood trauma. But he explained it to me. And so then I didn't have the fear associated with it, because I felt like a demon was chasing me, or like her spirit was to getting me because, she didn't have rest or whatever. It was terrifying, you guys. Of course, I didn't come in the house and say anything because you sound like a nut. But my counselor would
Right.
explain. He'd say, Jody, where did you see that woman? And I'd say, oh my God, she was walking down that sidewalk towards me. And then I understood it was just my mind bringing back that flashback. Why she was coming out of the woods, it felt like. I can't understand, but I do understand that it's not all darkness, that we have to walk through these things actually to get to the other side. Because I would be
Hmm.
an absolute dead drunk every night. I would have to drink so much just so I wouldn't have dreams of this dead lady under
Yeah.
my feet and all of this. I don't have to do that anymore. I can peacefully go to sleep. I can wake up at night and know that I'm okay, because I didn't change my reality. I walked through the bastard. There's a great
Yes.
big difference, right?
Yes.
No, kind of. So I just wanted to bring that up because it is really important to know that all triggering things are not like Satan be gone. I think that's kind of a religious thing. Remember, we talked
Yes.
about you got 2 seconds to heal, or 10 minutes, and then God calls it
Yes.
good. Like that's just, if we're triggered when
Yeah.
we're 80, we're triggered when we're 80.
Mhm.
That's, I
Yeah.
don't think that that's always dark. However, can darkness use things against us? 100% they can. So
Yes.
just to make that distinction there.
And
One,
I
triggers
wanted to
are,
say I wanted to say a couple things,
yes,
Jody.
please.
My therapist, who worked in child psychology and then worked with adults, and she specialized in trauma as
So
well,
good.
she
Mhm.
always asked me to talk her through any flashback I
I
had,
love
any
it.
trigger.
Yep.
And it took a lot of courage to describe it
Mhm.
all. And especially like what you said, Jody, of just feeling like I was crazy. Like I don't want
Exactly.
to put myself down, but I was afraid of what was
You
going on in
bet.
me. It was
Exactly.
so
Mhm.
confusing and so hard. And so I agree with you. And I encourage anyone who's listening to seek a trained
Mhm.
therapist who
Yeah,
is able to expertly walk with you through those things, because
Yes.
it's so illuminating. And for me, it's been a gradual process of like trusting God working in me to bring up what is next.
exactly.
And
And
and then
and
so
and the right, the pace, and you can guide the pace. Sometimes I would walk
mhm,
away from counseling for a year because you guys, I couldn't take anymore. Like I just wanted to go
Yeah.
smell a flower and watch the ocean. You know what I mean? So you can
mhm.
absolutely stop. Maybe I could have done my healing faster. I don't know. I'll never know because I didn't. I did it
But I also
at the
think that's
speed that
your
I could
right
do.
too, right? Because after we've been so manipulated and
Mm,
so controlled, I also think it's okay for us to have a choice in that,
100%.
you know?
Yes.
Mhm.
Hmm.
My counselor would talk often about, because nightmares were the same. He'd even say to me, this one time I had this dream, you guys. I was back in the motel room. We had just killed this lady. I had done it and I wrote something on the mattress. But I was taking a break from counseling, and my counselor said, Jody, I wish so bad you would have come in to, because I couldn't remember what I wrote. Isn't that funny how that is? But he felt it
Wow.
was very significant, but it disappeared. It was like disappearing ink on this mattress. And it disappeared from my mind because you guys know
Wow.
what we do with trauma. We let it disappear. So it is very
Yes.
important, even our dreams. If you're not going to a counselor, start journaling, start journaling, start journaling. Journaling really opened my life to healing before I ever went in. I remember writing down, the first thing I ever wrote was how my heart ached while I put on a smile. Because when you come from
Mm,
families of incest, you walk around with a smile on, you're a good kid.
Hmm.
You actually have to be a bad kid to start healing because you have to go against everything your parents
mhm,
taught you. So I guess I'm a rebel with a cause because I ain't listening
Yeah.
to them anymore. But that is yeah, it's very, very true. If you don't have a counselor, you cannot afford it. There are a lot of states that offer things, but definitely start journaling.
Yes.
One of the things I did want to talk about too, because I know now, Sylvia, do you have children? I can't remember if you do or don't have children.
I I do. I have one daughter.
I thought you did. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And how old is she?
She's 20.
Okay. So my girls are, don't get mad at me, girls. I'm pretty sure they're 35, 36 and 39 now. Something like
Oh
that. They're
yeah.
2 years and 7 months apart, but B's getting old and sometimes I can't remember. Now, Emily, how old are your
Yeah.
children?
I have one daughter and she is 7.
Okay. So,
Oh.
very honestly, we were talking about how our resemblance of our parents can trigger us. The other thing that I remember my counselor bringing up that I wanted us to talk about was how our children trigger us. And so, the problem is, in my life, my abuse started when I was very young. We moved out of that house and I turned 4. So it started when I was in 3. And my father continued, and my mother, they both continued to abuse me months before I left their house. I got married at 18. And so the triggers that our children do, my girls were more triggering to me actually when they became adults because my mother was so it horrified me, the things I had to do to my mother. It was disgusting. There's just no other word for it. So when they grew, you guys, this is what was terrible is all I would see is like a vagina in my mind's eye
Mm,
that would like
Oh wow.
overcome them. It was terrible. And I still fight with that deeply. And it was my counselor that said, Jody, your children are triggering to you. So talk to
mm,
me a little bit about that because isn't that horrible? You guys hear these? My girls are beautiful, beautiful. It has nothing to do with them. And
mhm,
it just it breaks my heart that I still get that imagery because they're women now. And my mother was a woman
mhm,
who abused me. And maybe it's more logical in my mind that a man has a penis. And I wasn't overly, I was more triggered by men's anger because in my mind, all anger led to murder.
mm,
But so anyway, talk about those triggers that are girl because unfortunately at different ages they trigger different things, don't they?
mhm,
Yes. I feel like Tessa did not really trigger me a lot when she was younger. I can really identify with you saying she was older because I could see my father was the disciplinarian in the home, not my mother. My mother's just so kind, and I could see her having the same, like Emily, that you spoke about, that, between, yourself and the father, that y'all decided that's just, and I know that's how my mother was. So
Mhm.
luckily I didn't have any of those, mother triggers. But since my father was my abuser and the disciplinarian of the family, I could see myself when I would go to discipline Tessa, and she would maybe talk back to me, you know probably around 9. I think around 9 or 10 is when she started, the preteen, and where they, they're not so agreeable anymore. They they want to
Oh,
have a
yes.
voice. I'm like, you're 9, you don't need a voice right now.
Right.
um but I would see myself, losing my temper with her. And then I would get angry at myself and start and have a lot of self-hatred for myself, when really I'm just disciplining my daughter. But, like you said, our genes, our makeup, and I am 100% my father. And, but my kindness and my giving, and putting others a lot of times before myself, which I've really had to work on that in the last few years, comes from my mother. She's a very soft, gentle person.
That's
Um,
beautiful. I'm so thankful you
but
had that.
yeah, me too. Very nurturing. I was born to be a mother, and
That's beautiful.
I wish I could have had more, but it just wasn't in the cards, and that's okay, because the one I got is perfect for me,
That's
to me.
awesome.
But yeah, and then I would, that self-hatred, then that's when I would go run to the bottle.
Right.
And so when I would run to the bottle, then of course that makes me react not the way I would if I was sober with my daughter.
Exactly. I did the same thing.
And it was very painful for her. And probably by the time she was almost 11, um, she said, "Mom, I want to go live with Dad." I was like, "Wait, what? Like,
Oh, yeah.
what do you mean?" Because her dad was not Father of the Year, and but would never abuse her. Thank goodness, he just didn't fit. It's strange that I had him as a partner, because normally we pick people like our abusers, but um and I'll never forget it. And I said, "Okay, she was like, "And I want Dad to come and pick me up right now." And I said, "Okay." And he came and he picked her up, and probably within 3 or 4 days, I went over to go take her some clothes, because she was still over there. She'd never lived with him. And she handed me a letter, and that little child wrote the most beautiful letter. But she she saved me from continuing in that behavior,
It's awesome.
Um,
Don't our kids do? Yes,
yeah.
yeah, I
There
have
are little saviors sometimes,
they really are.
and
Because
so,
their voices are saying, yeah, you're hurting me. You're killing our
mhm.
relationship. And
And I
unfor
didn't, beat her up,
no,
or,
no, I know, I
bruise
know.
her or anything, but it was very unhealthy, the language
Right.
and the tone that I was
Right.
using.
Oh, and
It
I got
was
drunk
it
a
was wrong.
lot, and that hurt my children very much. I'd come home
Yes.
drunk. I was drunk a lot. I mean, I just was. For years I was drunk a lot.
Yeah.
And still going to counseling and all that, but boy, I couldn't wait to escape, and it hurt my children deeply. It did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Emily, go ahead and talk a little. That I get it, Sylvia. It's so true. That's such a beautiful thing to say, because right, our dads had full control. Let's use that, right? So, Emily,
Uh-huh.
what did that look like for you?
Uh, Remind me, children, her being a trigger to me.
Yes, or it
Um,
maybe she's not. Yeah, I don't know.
well, I think, of course, I wouldn't call it a trigger as much as it has forced me to process my childhood more, because I have revisited it in watching her grow and going through the process of her
Mm,
babyhood,
Mhm.
especially.
mhm,
And unfortunately, I was still in relationship with my family when my daughter was born, and unfortunately, my mom spent quite a bit of time at our home. I had already made a pretty clear boundary with my dad, so he was not really in the picture in the relationship, like time spent, but my mom was there quite a bit, and that really brought out some bad patterns in me because I wanted to please her and I was still trying to
Mm-hmm.
fawn to her and play into her game, I guess. And then I found myself entering into patterns of thought or even talking about my daughter in ways that were in line with
Mhm.
her, which were quite cruel and almost making my daughter out to be somehow evil, like, and not
Mm-hmm.
worthy, not
No, I get
worthy.
it. I get it.
Yeah.
And it's like a very ugly, subtle, um, and very sad, unloving mentality. And I would feel myself slipping into that when my mom was at our home
Mhm.
because I wanted to please her. And I started to realize that I couldn't be true to myself and to what I believed was loving as God called me to be and who I wanted to be for my daughter and be with her. Like I didn't have that capacity in my own self.
Mhm.
And I tried to talk with her about it and she never got it. She like never tracked with me. I wrote her letters about it. She never was able to hear from me. And that's when it was clear to me that I'm not going to be able to play both sides of this all the time. So I don't know if that's a trigger as much as I realized really what I had gone through
Right. I
as a
get it
baby.
though.
And
Mhm.
it was a lot of grief for me.
You know,
Um,
it
yeah,
reminds me, this is a years and years and years ago, this pastor said he was talking about going back to your family of origin. And he said, think of it this way. You get to the door, and right at the door, there's all of these labels. And when people walk through the door, they pick up the label that that house gave them. And I
mm-hmm,
never forgot that
Oh,
because that's
wow.
kind of what you're saying, right? Like when you go back to that environment, we pick up our labels and we
mm-hmm,
think we're not
Mm-hmm.
going to, like I read that, yeah, I think it was 2 panels ago about my daughter watching me around my father, and I had come out about the abuse, but we all had to go back to a family reunion or a family funeral. I'm sorry, a friend of the family. And she said my mom went into autopilot, some kind of weird
mm-hmm,
version of my mother I'd never seen. I was bringing him pie, getting him coffee, laughing at his jokes. And here's this man. It was a murdering, a murderer, and raped me for all of my childhood. And I immediately went into autopilot. And, I thought about that the other day, actually, after that panel discussion. If my father were to walk in the room, I know now I would not be that person. And you know
right,
how I did that is I'd go see him. I'd see him a handful of times and confront him on these things. I mean, we had murder
mm-hmm,
between us.
Mm-hmm.
And but every time, a lot of people do not go back and confront. And my counselor would always advise me, Jody, it's the best thing. And it
mm-hmm,
gave me back my power, you guys, but I would
Yeah.
physically be terrified. I mean, terrified. And I did the same thing with my mother. The last time I saw my mother, I made her look at me and I said, for all of it, I forgive you. I
mm-hmm,
just needed to release it, but I also needed her to look in my
Mm-hmm.
eyes and say, everything that you've done to me, I remember
Yes.
first. It's empowering, isn't it,
mm-hmm,
you guys?
mm-hmm,
Acknowledge that you
Yes.
know that I know, like,
Exactly, because there is power
yes,
in
hmm
that. There genuinely, it's empowering. It says, you're not in charge anymore. I'm an adult, and I
hmm
have
yes,
adult children now, and I have a different role in their life. I'm not the authoritarian now. They're adults. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
I get
yes.
to love them and enjoy fine, food and wine and all this stuff, but that changes. But in an abusive family, that never changes. They keep the authority until you die
hmm
because
mm-hmm,
guess what? They're still grooming us. That's really what
Yes.
that's
completely.
about. Yeah.
And
Yes.
I think in terms of the triggering part, I started to become very, um, I guess, aware that they were repeating the pattern with my daughter. you know,
Yes.
if they spent time with her.
100%.
And so that then led me to feel quite a bit of fear, and I stood up for her. It was when I started to find my voice, was because of their treatment of my daughter, which of course links to other things about, you know, growth as a
Mhm.
person. But um I think that watching all of that did take me back to those years, those early years of my childhood, and um it forced me to process things.
Well,
Mhm.
I don't think I went into full panic or flashback, but it was definitely made me remember all of it, and I had that awareness. Now, my daughter is 7, and that's when the ongoing sexual abuse started in my life. So I know that as she moves through these years, there may be more, excuse me, more of that quote triggering, but I
mhm,
have not experienced that so far. And it
mhm.
might be partly because I've done so much work. I'm
And
hoping.
that's
We'll
awesome,
see.
right?
Mhm.
One of the things that you said I want to go back to is watching the pattern with your children. I am telling you, these are evil colonies. I mean, I cannot tell you because you know you can't call them godly. So there's only two things in life. It's good or
Mm-hmm.
bad, right? And so for I've watched people do this. They see how their children are treated, and you know what they do? They turn and look the other way.
Oh.
And you
Mhm.
see it that you guys, that's generational trauma,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
allowing that generational trauma. I don't really know in their hearts,
Yeah.
they probably are not saying, oh, I'm going to hurt it, but they've never stood up for themselves. So they don't know how
Mm-hmm.
to stand up for their children. And so it always starts with you see you. We've got to see ourselves so we can see our children.
Yes.
What was happening when I wasn't healing is I couldn't see my kids because I was so dumbfounded by my own pain and my own loss
Mm-hmm.
and my own grief. And I couldn't find my way out of the
Mhm.
paper bag. You know what I mean? And so it to see your children, like you just explained, you have to see yourself and you have to
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
see the hurt that you have. And so many there's a cost to that, right, you guys? Because then now all of a sudden we have to heal because to step in our
Yes.
stories, we have to look at the
Mm-hmm.
eyebrows that look like our fathers. We have to look at the lips in our hands. And, you know,
Mhm.
you can't separate that until you dissect it. And then all of a sudden it starts falling away. But
Mhm.
depending on how long and many of us, you guys, the severe childhood trauma year after year after year makes that constant work, right? Like I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to say it's not that I'm just going to never have this, but you have to do the work. I love my counselor would always say that, Jody, you are who you are because you've done the work. But that you guys, for
Yeah.
13 years, I dated, but I didn't live with anybody. I overdrank. Like I was doing the work, but it was so hard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So hard. It was so
Yes.
hard. So I think that's such a good distinction. When you see it happening to your children, change the channel, walk away. I don't know, you guys,
Mhm.
can you stay close to these families that don't change? I don't believe you can. I think in our hearts we want to because they're our family. But talk about that, Sylvia. I see you shaking your head. Talk to me about
I
that.
I I can't do it because for numerous reasons, but there's a lot of generational curses
Mhm.
going
Mm-hmm.
on in my
Yes,
father's side of the
100%.
family.
Hmm.
My mother's side never had any, and it's an exact reflection of who she is today and why she is because their family doesn't know anything like that. They never
So
had that in
beautiful.
their family, where my father did. And just being him and his brothers were so alike. Um, so being around them was just I couldn't do it.
You
I
probably
couldn't
lit
do
up
it.
like a firecracker.
Yes, exactly. It
Right?
was like pew, like the Roadrunner going the other
Exactly.
way.
There's a
Like,
shiny, there's a squirrel. Like, I mean, it's
yeah,
just, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I totally get
But
that.
but there is so much power in, what you said, Jody, about confronting,
Hmm.
like your mother. And like I went back and when I was older and I confronted my father, and
Hmm.
now I have a voice. I'm an adult now, and you cannot
Mm-hmm.
do this to me anymore. And I know
Exactly.
exactly what you did. So you can hide behind whatever you want to hide
And they'll
behind
call you a liar. They all
or
do.
whatever. Yes, yes.
Nuts
But
or
it's
sluts.
so, yes, right. But it's, yeah, we're the little, yeah, the lost puppies and all that.
Exactly.
No, I'm
With
not a
mental
lost puppy.
illness.
Yes,
Mhm.
I'm not a,
We've heard it all.
yeah, bipolar, depressed,
Yep.
none.
Alcoholic, on and on and on
But
and on and on.
yeah, yes. But I think it's that is so powerful because even in Journey to Heal, if you can't confront your abuser, that's okay. But it is required and asked of you, if you can, to write a letter confronting your
Mhm.
abuser. What would you say? And a lot of these girls will eventually mail that.
Mhm.
I'm working with a girl right now. She eventually mailed that letter to her father.
It's huge.
And the ugliness that he came back at her with,
Mhm.
Mhm.
and the
Mhm.
threats, and it's like,
It's
how
horrible.
dare he?
Yeah.
But you know what? She's rising above it,
Mhm.
and
It's
she
awesome.
is just becoming such a beautiful young lady.
It's
And
so
I think
cool.
it is so cool. So I
Yes,
just hope people listening will know that, it's, if it's your time, because it takes a lot of strength to
it does.
do it in your time, but write that letter, even if you're not going to send it or you can't send it. Who knows? Maybe one day you will. But there's power in those words and taking back, hey, I'm not this little victim. I'm a
Mhm.
survivor and I wear it
It's
proudly.
so true. Right. Even if you have to start talking to your cat or your dog, talk it
Right.
out,
Yes.
practice. I do that because I do a lot of presenting,
Mm-hmm.
to boards and, pretty groups that are kind of scary. And you know what?
Yes.
I always talk it out first. And so I mean, just talk it out. It really, it sounds cool. And that's what we're here doing together too. One of the
Yes.
things I want to do with the time that we have left is we always open up and talk about these realities. I want us to talk about some of the tools that we use because all
Mhm.
of us have been through healing. I know I use tools all the time. I can watch a movie, you guys, and be so triggered around a murder scene or if somebody's throat gets slit. I mean, I used to
Mm-hmm.
freeze and be stuck until I called somebody and they talked me off a ledge. I'm talking about a counselor because they were on speed dial in those days. Not, and I didn't use them often because, of course, we don't reach out, but when you have to.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned how to go through that. So I want to talk. I mean, to me, the things that I use the most are grounding techniques. And so I don't know. I want you guys to talk about it. I wanted to say some things about that. Like, um, these exercises can work. Like, name 5 things you see in a room right
Mhm.
now. That got me through that murder memory. And I remember being on the phone with my counselor, and she's like, Jody, I just want you to look around the room. Don't make any judgments about what you're seeing. Focus on an object and tell me about that object. It helps, you guys. You sometimes because
Mm-hmm.
you can get such a visceral reaction, you can't even breathe. Because especially when fear comes around it, like we've talked
Yes.
about memories that come up. So looking around your room, sometimes you can name things that you feel right now. My feet are on the floor. My chair is
Mm-hmm.
soft. I'm feeling the arm of my chair. There's a candle across the room. Honestly, you guys, I use that
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
often. I would start getting almost a like a panic attack feeling when I'd be driving down the road,
Yes.
and I'd say, okay,
You're
I can
Mhm.
spiraling.
feel, yes, I can
Mhm.
feel my car's tires on the pavement. Like, I would just start going through it.
Mhm.
I can feel them going round, and all of those things, right? They help. So, what do you guys? There's another one that says name 3 things that you're hearing right now: the TV, birds
Mm-hmm.
outside. But to refocus those things, it brings you back to that reality, kind of like when I put my lipstick on and I see my mother's face. You're Jody. You are not
Yep,
her.
that's exactly what I do. I say, "No,
I
you're
say it, I
you.
have
You're
to.
you." Every day.
Exactly.
No, you're you.
And
You're
it's
you.
sad because,
Uh-huh.
we read these stories that say, oh, I look like my dad, or there's this whole blog about, I got all my looks from my mom and they love it. And for
Mhm.
us,
Yes.
it's damaging, like another thing taken. And I don't focus on what's taken, but it's just the truth, right?
Mhm.
And another thing is, they say
Yeah.
you can name 2 things that you smell right now. Often I will smell my coffee and taste it,
Mhm.
like, or whatever it is I have, tea, that kind of thing. And the last thing, and then I want you guys to talk about it because I love this one too, is say something good about yourself. My mother's an attractive lady, and I'll say, thank you, mom, for giving me a pretty face. You know what I mean? Like something
Mhm.
Oh,
kind about
yeah.
something that they gave, because my parents were very good looking people. It's so sad that they chose the path that they chose. And,
Mm.
you know, um, So anyway, those are some of my lists. You guys talk to me about things that you do. I love how you change the shower. I just want to leave some examples of we
Mhm.
haven't really done that, but I
Sure.
know that we all know them, right? So talk to me about that.
Yes. I think I get a lot. I have done the grounding techniques before when I'm really like a panic attack. I'd never had a panic attack before in my life
Yes.
until my older years. I used to think, wow, I wonder, like, I want to empathize for these people, but I'm like, I don't even know what that is.
That
Like, what do
started
you
with me
mean?
too, I think in menopause.
I'm like, what? What? This panic attack? So, but so I did do that.
Horrible.
I think for me, the way I deal with those things is serving. I have a servant's heart,
I love it.
and I get so much healing from that from my church, and serving. And thank goodness, it's just a wonderful faith-based church, and that's how Kaylee and I met, and that was 3 years ago, and
So
we're
cool.
thick as thieves, and we've been through this together, and she's been there with me, and I start another group in 2 weeks, and but I do have to have those things because me as leading them through this, and
Hmm.
hearing all their stories, and everybody's in a room, and I'm the one who has to you know, keep the
Right.
calm and be the leader. And so I have to take care of myself. And I realize that if I don't do that self-care, then that's when I start to, spin out and start feeling, very so self-care, serving and self-care are my two
That's beautiful. I
my
love
two
that.
biggies. And I'll make it special sometimes, and invite a friend. And if she can't afford it, say, well, this time, how about I got you my treat?
Yeah, I love
Let's
it.
just go and indulge and just be girls and, just have a great time. So serving and self-care. And
That's
women, as women,
beautiful.
a lot of times we don't do that because as women, we put everybody else first, you know.
So true. You take the best pork chop, I'll take the crumb that's left
Yeah,
on the
I'll take the
plate.
bone. Yeah, it's okay. Well,
Exactly.
there's no meat on that bone. That's okay. I can kind of chew on it. I'll be
Exactly.
fine. Yeah.
So true. All
So,
right, Emily, you go ahead and share with us.
Yeah, actually I gathered, so I've read so many books.
Me
I'm
too.
love to read. And one of the books that I purchased for myself, I found it on Amazon because I was struggling a lot at work when I
Mm,
was in my job. If there were people who were questioning what I wanted to do in
mm.
my patient management, or who were in some way in conflict with me, I wanted to be able to enter into those discussions with strength and not just fawn or people please. Or
hmm
if someone looked like my abuser, there were a lot of things coming up at work, and I was frustrated because I wanted to be able to maintain
Mhm.
my excellence in my job. So I bought a book called Thriving at Work. It's by Nancy Brooke and
Oh,
Cynthia
cool.
Cranen. And I've worked through the whole thing. It's a workbook. And so it lets you
Oh, I
talk,
love those.
it has prompts and it
Mhm.
helps you. Um, and so a lot of things were helpful from that. And one of them was a mantra. And I've kept it with me for probably,
Oh, I
I
love
don't know how
it.
long now, like 8 years maybe. And I put it on post-its all over the place. And it says, my energy is calm, focused, and directed toward my immediate goal. So that's
Mm.
long. That's a lot of words, but I've memorized
hmm
it and it goes through in my
Be
mind,
in the moment. Yeah.
even when I'm in traffic, like you said, Jody. My energy
hmm
is calm, focused, and directed toward my immediate goal.
Mhm.
Because sometimes when we're processing things, our mind will take us so far away from where we are physically that
Oh,
I
hmm
sometimes worry about myself. Like, am I going to be able to
hmm
safely get myself from one place to another?
guys, I'll
Because
check out, right?
Yeah.
I mean, don't, I'm
yeah,
on the
because
roof
I'm
somewhere.
so caught up
Yeah.
in whatever
Mhm.
I'm healing or thinking about or
Yes.
remembering. It's
Yes.
almost like a flashback hangover or a
Well,
nightmare hangover.
it
That's what
is.
it feels
And
like
it's
to me.
called dissociation sometimes too, because in
Right.
childhood, we lived
Mhm.
a lot of dissociation, which would be another great thing to talk about because I dissociated, I think, half my life before I moved into healing. So keep going.
So in any case, I use that phrase and I used it today when I was in traffic because I was like,
It's
I do not want to
awesome.
rear end anybody. Like, no, that I don't want that to happen. I'm on my way to pick up my daughter. I need
Mhm.
to stay functional. So that my energy is calm, focused, and directed toward my immediate goal. That's helped me at work. I'm assessing a patient right now. I need to help them with what what they're
I
going
love
through.
that.
Mhm.
And so that book, Thriving at Work, has been one of the most practical things to help me. And that's just one example from it. But I use music as well.
Yes. Oh,
And
I
Mhm.
music
do.
is
Me
very
too.
A
helpful,
biggie.
All this.
very
I'd rather have,
helpful.
yep, me too. Music over TV if I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also use walking outdoors
Mhm.
because to me, I know for different people, people feel safe in different environments, but for me, being outdoors feels safe. So going on a walk,
Mhm.
hearing the birds, always hearing the birds, it links to me knowing I'm cared for. So um,
Mhm.
those are helpful for me. Those are some things.
Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
And, you know,
Yes.
I just want to touch on that for a minute. I blog, and through blogging, I have met a lot of people around the world. And I'll tell you, some people, you guys, are agoraphobic. They cannot get out of their homes.
Mhm.
They do not
Mhm.
have jobs. They are almost disabling
Mhm.
themselves because now they move into disability because it's crippling, you guys. If you
Mhm.
don't heal, it's
Mhm.
crippling. And so many people,
Yep.
they work for themselves. I had this one woman say, we talked about that. And so it's such a huge thing. There are many people that are not doing as well as we are. And it's
Mhm.
hard to remember that, you get this message like I'm barely hanging on. And so
Mhm.
that's why we're
Mhm.
here, and that's why we're here talking about it. But it's huge what you're talking
Amen.
about, Emily, about people at work. Is so hard. And healing hangover. I actually did a blog one time called Healing Hangover because it's a real thing. Like when you have a
Right.
a real big memory that comes back, oh, you're sore. You're so sore for like a
Yes.
week sometimes. And you know what?
Mhm.
Drink tea, take baths, light candles, let that soreness sit with you
Mhm.
because it needs to. That's a wound that festered that you just healed. And so I mean, I don't want those moments, but I love those moments because I know that I've
Yes.
just journeyed through something that was really important.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's really
Amen.
beautiful. Emily, do you happen to have, you said that you made a poem. Do you happen to have that by you?
Oh, well, I'll have to. Well, I went through this whole other thing that was really meaningful. I don't know if I have it near me. Let's see.
Okay. Just
I
when
have
you
so
said
many
that, I
things
thought,
in here. I'll find it for the next time. But
okay.
one other program I went through is called the Body Positive, and I became a
Mm.
facilitator for it.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
that's like a whole nother episode, but that also gave me lots of exercises on and prompts for being at peace or growing in being at peace with yourself.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And just my daughter went through some, as we've talked about before, most people who've been sexually abused have some kind of eating disorder. I haven't met one that doesn't have
Mhm.
Mhm.
addiction problems and eating disorders. Anyway, so she was reading this
Neither.
one book and she said, Mom, get a big piece of paper. This is when she was a teenager. And I want you to draw out on this piece of paper how big you think you are. And then you lay in that, and then you have a person trace your real body. And you guys, you'll be stunned how big you make yourself, how much bigger you make yourself than you actually are. It was
Oh
quite
wow.
eye-opening. It was really something. So it is really true perception, good self-talk, good care, all of
Mhm.
Mhm.
those things. When you fail, forgive yourself immediately because God does, and then just get up and keep going. Don't beat yourself up. My dad used to make us pay. And after a week or two, he'd come to you and say, okay, the slate's clean. So that lived in me. I had this
Mhm.
constant guilt that
Mhm.
I always, sometimes I'll hear God
Mhm.
say, you didn't do anything wrong because I always feel like I'm doing something
Right.
wrong. I haven't even done anything yet, but I did something wrong.
Right.
And then when
Yes.
I do something wrong, it's really wrong. So,
Yeah.
be kind to yourself. So if you guys have any closing thoughts, we are at time. Thank you so much for your time. It was beautiful. I appreciate it. I want to give it back to you guys if you have anything that you'd like to say, and then we'll close.
Well, I think everybody said some really, really important things. And I think one of the most important things that I've had to learn is to give myself grace. Give
Yes.
Mm,
yourself that grace. No
100%.
matter what that looks like for you, you deserve it. You're loved, you're important, and you you have value. And anything that's valued deserves grace. And
mhm.
give that
Amen.
to yourself.
Amen.
It's
Emily, go
something,
ahead.
yeah, something I think I noticed, Sylvia, that you said that really resonated with me is that it's such an empowering and a self-empowering act to create our own safe space,
Mm,
Yes.
to create our own
Mm-hmm.
place that we feel safe and we can grow and heal. So
Mm-hmm.
exploring what that is for each person, if it's creating, uh, your own room that's safe, or a community of friends that's safe, or
Mm-hmm.
no matter how small it is, if you live in a small place, if it's one closet that's safe, some place for you to be
mhm.
physically, that you can be comforted. And um, I just think
Mm-hmm. That's so
that's
good.
so
Mhm.
important. And so that's one thing I would say, to think of for yourself, how you
Mm-hmm.
could grow that and empower yourself in that.
I love that. Yep. And
Me
I
too.
think I
Yeah.
would just underline that complete forgiveness for yourself. We are imperfect human beings. And the biggest thing that I have learned is that God does not want me perfect. He doesn't expect me to be perfect. And
Mm,
he does have unconditional love. I had a person say to me last night, Jody, unconditional love doesn't exist. You know what I want to end
Oh,
this broadcast with?
mm,
wow.
Unconditional love does exist. It's so
yes.
sad. And that
Yeah.
person deals with a lot of just bitterness and a very unhappy person. So we just want to
Mm-hmm.
say God loves you. There is unconditional love, and we'll see you next time. God bless. Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Have a good night.
You too.